the world has obviously changed quite a bit since we last saw one another in Sydney, and so thanks for being here. And I'm all energized given just talking to Lexi. So before we get too far into it, would you just share a little bit about who you are and what you're doing now with Reframe Work?
Absolutely. So I come from a management consulting / corporate HR world. I've been privileged to work at brands such as Pricewaterhouse, PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM. I led people analytics at TIAA and Fidelity before I went to live into this future of work as a solopreneur. And I made my mission to humanize the workplace and bring more human to HR and use things such as analytics, technology, human-centered design thinking to create a better workplace experience. I work as a consultant, so I consult on these practices, as well as I work with the conference board as a program director for several councils. And that enables me to influence the thinking across multiple organizations at the industry level. And I also founded a nonprofit focused on women over 45 and helping them prepare for the skills of the future and expand their work horizon.
So you're just relaxing these days, is what I'm hearing. No,
pretty much.
Yeah, and you're. Are you in Manhattan? Do I recall correctly, or are you just outside?
Outside Manhattan in New Jersey, so about 25 miles away. But nowadays, doesn't matter. Not everybody's a Zoom call away.
Yeah, and the reason I say that, I know that area got hit hard with COVID, and I just hope you and your family are safe. So I just want to say that. And as we enter into this discussion, again echoing what Lexi has said, and I know you've worked with her, it is this inflection point, this morality moment, that we're in, and for people such as yourself, and I might allow myself to be in the same company. We've been pushing on this notion of people data for good, about more diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization for quite some time. And now we have kind of a lot of wind behind us to get where we want to go. Yet there are still barriers in front of us. Do you mind if we start there? Because I just want to have a very real conversation about why organizations aren't doing more. And if you have any thoughts on the hurdles that need to be overcome so we can in fact get to a place where people feel more included, feel more safe psychologically, emotionally, and physically. I mean, what are your thoughts there around the barriers and how to overcome them?
I think there are multiple things that are converging at the same time at the moment. On one side, analytics was becoming in vogue, and finally the leaders were asking for it. At the same time, I think there is a knowledge and experience gap, but also there is a decision-making skills and acumen gap too. So once you have the access to the information and recommendations, do you trust it? And it takes time to build that trust. It takes time to refine the technology, to refine the data sets that you're looking at, to train the managers on, do you believe what you see? Do you question it? Who do you go to escalate if needed? So that's one part. It's a skill and decision-making acumen gap. Another part is technology. So if you think about what happened this year, everything is up in the air. Some companies are growing like crazy just because they have seen an increase in demand. Other companies are shrinking just because their business model is changing, or the consumption patterns are changing, and they have to really adapt what they do and how they do it. So created a lot of havoc on organizations, and obviously everybody is scrutinizing their budget. So when it comes to investing in the infrastructure, in skills and technology, that is, in some cases, is put is deprioritized. So that'll create further gaps in bringing the data and bringing facts and evidence. And as you were talking um, to Lexi earlier, it is many times just shedding the light that will trigger the change. Because if you don't know where you are, you will not know where to make improvements or where to invest or where to keep people accountable for that. The last thing that I think is happening right now is the fact that we are in a pandemic and behaviors are different and what people do is different and what we define as success in an organization is different. Everything is up in the air. So if you think from analytics, and especially as we get into some of the more advanced statistical models and more AI type tools, like what do you do with the data that you've used to train the models? Are those insights still accurate? Do you need to really throw all of that away and start from scratch? Do you need to retest the model? So there's a lot of complexity, and it will take time to figure out how you need to adapt in order to now represent the new reality that we're living through and define new success measurements that may or may not be applicable.
I yeah, I hug you for saying that because it's a question that is not asked enough, and there's sometimes an over reliance on the data, over reliance on the insight. And just to come back around to something that you mentioned, and I want to frame it this way: uh, diversity officers or those leading diversity in organizations oftentimes are a team of one. They might have a limited budget and their job is really around influencing. And then you have people analytics over here. And I've seen over the years them getting closer together and working more efficiently and effectively. That being said, it's kind of been almost ancillary in my view. And now, given what's happening in the world, do you see it becoming more core? Is like this is a key element of our culture. This is a key element of what we want to become, or is that just wishful thinking on my part?
Now, I think there is a bigger change that is starting to come about. Um, you might have seen yesterday there was an announcement from PwC about the fact that they're publishing their new diversity and inclusion numbers. I think there will be a growing pressure, especially from public companies, from institutional investors, to take a look at more how human capital is being treated, and that, of course, requires a lot more measurements and disclosures. But more importantly, I think the current crisis, because we're living through multiple at this time, the current crisis of social and racial justice movement that we're seeing will propel companies to report and disclose their diversity composition. But of course, that's only the beginning, because if you think about all the aspects of creating an inclusive workplace, yes, you have to start with diversity, and that is about visible segments that are being disclosed and reported on. When it comes to inclusion, that's a whole different story, and that's where analytics can come and help you out, not only through surveys, but also through organizational network analysis and understanding how people and managers connect with each other. And in a way, having remote access to a workplace gives you tons of data that you can now make a lot of different decisions, observe patterns. But the most important part is the equity component, because just being a diverse and inclusive, it's great. But if you're not creating equal access for people to career progressions, to job with P&L responsibilities, as Lexi was talking about, you'll continue to perpetuate the same issues. So in a way, you have to attack and tackle all three of those. And I think data will allow you to do that.
Yeah, it will. And I am, again, both excited and kind of healthily skeptical, if you will, that there'll be fundamental change happening quickly. And walk me through this from your perspective. So we have this inflection point, this morality moment, which is just echoing in my head, and I really like that Lexi, brought that up. However, as we've seen time and time again, the attention of leaders, the attention of society is oftentimes very fleeting. And so
Yeah.
it's like it's a hot moment and the news cycle changes, and now we're on to some other trend. So in order for this diversity, equity, and inclusion to truly stick, there has to be some systematic processes, systematic insight that is consumed to inform what we're doing moving forward. So the pointed question here is, how can we make this an ongoing way of being in organizations, something that's sustainable, something that we can look at 5 years from now and say, okay, that's when we really turned the key and now we're driving down the road and this is the new normal. What are some of your thoughts that need to be in place to bring us to that place?
Multiple streams. And I think the challenge is everybody thinks, well, we'll just create one measurement. And if we keep people accountable and leaders accountable for that, that will solve the problem. I think it's a lot more complex to think about the issue. So if you want to be a brand that is known for sustainable practices, considering one of the measurements, and in your sustainability reporting, you can report how well you are treating your employees and the workforce in general, because they are part of your stakeholders. And it's ironic that a little over a year ago, so August 19th, 181 CEOs signed the Business Roundtable, which was trying to bring more of the public organizations into the stakeholder primacy as opposed to just shareholder primacy. So the business world is starting to pay attention to this, but there hasn't been as much reporting and disclosures on what they're doing, and it takes time to move big organizations into the right direction. So this is at the macro level, to look at the types of measurements you're tracking and what you're disclosing to the public. As you get
Got it.
inside the organization, of course, you can keep leaders accountable and put certain goals and targets for their hiring and the composition of their workforce. But I think the more important part is, and where HR really can play a role, is to look at the end-to-end life cycle and understand how the pipeline evolves. Are you providing equitable access for people, right? From the moment where you start hiring and creating your job description, does it have the right type of language that will not discourage women or certain minorities from applying? Is your slate adequate, right? Do you have at least one woman and one person of color out of the 5 that you're presenting to the manager for the interviews? Once they come in, do people have equal access to different teaming environments and social interactions and leaders for networking and development opportunities? Are you providing them with access to certain groups where they can develop their skills, where they can get promoted, get exposed to new projects? So you really need to look at end-to-end cycle and see where you may need to make small changes sometimes to have a disproportionately bigger impact.
Got it. And so I understand, obviously we have global crisis, what I call, this perpetual disruption that's happening. So I understand you have some slides you want to share as well, yeah?
Yeah, sure. All right. So are they visible? Perfect. So I wanted to start with a few definitions, and we already talked a little bit about this. So diversity, inclusion, and equity, and we described that. But I want to describe a little bit the crisis that we are living in. So if you think about at the macro level, we are seeing huge demographic shifts, and while those are typically slow moving, they do have a big impact on the society composition, on the labor force, and access to employment. And of course, once they are in employment, that supports the country or the the taxation, the social security, the healthcare systems, etc. We're also seeing unprecedented digitization of our world environment. And what's interesting is a lot of companies that have been trying to become digital or started the digital revolution before the COVID struck were forced to adopt this digital technology and figure out a way to move their operations virtually, as well as enable their people to work and be productive, regardless of where they are and how much they're able to contribute. All of this digital behavior leaves huge amount of data for us to make decisions differently. So again, we can now infer how connected people feel, whether they are working later in the day or outside the working hours just because they're homeschooling of children or caretaking responsibilities are forcing them to do so. And then you may make decisions about the burnout risks or creating space for people to really focus on delivering and doing the work as opposed to being in coordination meetings all the time. And the disintermediation, which is a trend of eliminating the intermediary from the value creation chain, it's being accelerated. So if you think about the example of Amazon as a perfect technology first company that then moves into adjacent spaces to capture that space. I think with shift to all of this online, it creates whole new spaces for new industries and companies, or it prompts people to rethink their business model altogether and moving from physical space, or if you're a retail, from a warehouse, from a store to a virtual way of delivering your services. So all of this creates a lot of complexity from engagement level. And while we as humans now, we can connect with anybody and everybody around the world, it also creates a sense of isolation and loneliness, just because it's really impossible to connect with everybody on a meaningful level. And we are constantly bombarded with virtual with messages, with meetings, and our capacity to absorb as humans is really limited. We have not evolved as fast as the technology around us. So this brings me to the second type of epidemic we're living through. It's the complexity of the work environment, and knowing the number of tools that we have to interact with, and meetings and notifications and Slack. So all of this creates even further sense of anxiety and stress on people. And we see a lot of the individuals in the workplace are starting to experience mental health issues and stress. Some of them decide to quit altogether. The other type of crisis we're living through is the economic. We have seen right now we're living through one of the worst recessions in 80 years. The unemployment rate dipped at 14% and now recovered slightly in August. It's at 10.2. But as more and more companies decide to control their cost, we could see that those numbers going up again. And the challenge is that the small and medium business, the companies that are really representing 90% of the businesses in the U.S. and are most likely than not employing disproportionately women and minorities, are being devastated, especially in the service industries. So that creates also another background of care and empathy that we need to bring to everybody to support them in this trying time. And of course, the pandemic, the last crisis that we really talk about, it's shifting a lot of things, but also creates space for us to quickly adapt and maybe finally invest in some of those digital technologies or better employee experience initiatives and well-being, and focus on measuring the intangibles and bring that humanity back into the workplace. As I mentioned, the pandemic, in addition to impacting economically different companies and types of businesses and industries, they're also impacting different segments. So when we think about diversity and inclusion, we traditionally will look at visible dimensions and gender, race, but if we now look at the impact of pandemic, it may have revealed different types of segments we should consider. disproportionately impacted, such as older individuals, right? They will be more likely than not avoided than um, more likely than not be impacted by layoffs. Similarly, women and people of color and immigrants who will be more likely than not in essential occupations, they will be at higher risk of being exposed, as well as more likely to step out of the workplace just because they will have to take care of their kids at home. Less educated workers, again, they will be in frontline and occupations that will be disproportionately considered essential. And then younger workers, those who have graduated and didn't get the chance to really celebrate their big milestones, or they are entering a abysmal job market and more likely will have a tougher time finding the roles for their first, and it will take them a lot longer to catch up in terms of their compensation. Of course, caregivers, workers who have contracted COVID, since we don't know whether there is reinfection risk, etc., and then people with mental health issues. So the way we can possibly solve some of these challenges is look at the workplace experience. And there is a difference between the term employee experience, and in my mind, this is a more inclusive term because it's looking at the end-to-end cycle of how an individual interacts with the brand, with the employment, with the workplace. And that starts from the moment when they don't know anything about the brand until they become aware and they say, "Ooh, I want to bring my talent to them. I want to become a candidate." Then they go through the hiring experience and they may get the job or may not job, but every experience in the process of interacting with the organization leaves a lasting impact. So from a HR perspective, this requires a slightly different way of thinking and looking from a human-centric perspective as opposed to HR process lifecycle. And in every point of these journeys, we have the opportunity to make a change and bring a very different interaction, and technology as well as analytics enable us to do so and detect where there's possibility to intervene or put a simple solution that may automate a step that was not necessary and was taking too much time anyway. And then the other part we need to consider is look at these journeys from not only the traditional segments that we look at, but also consider how can we make it more inclusive for people who may have physical disabilities, people who may have language issues, or possibly they have different needs, because what a woman over 50 needs is different than possibly what a woman over 50 who is Black needs. So considering different segments and what type of flexibility or what type of enablement they may need will go a long way. And once we create for everybody, I think we all will benefit from it. And of course, the last point is to think how we can create and bring value to people. Not everybody comes to work only for money or only for benefits. People want to come to work for a company that is responsible, that has providing them with opportunities to grow, build a skill, connect to a community of like-minded individuals, makes it easier for them to leave a legacy or make an impact. So the more we can tailor what we offer up through our HR programs to tailor to different needs of people, the more we can get access to a great set of talent and also build our organization into a very inclusive and diverse company. So with that, I think I reached the end. Any questions? Does this make sense?
I just I just love what you do and how you think. I'll just say that up front. And as we start to wrap up, because there's so much we can get into, and we're going to have to talk again, obviously, about some of the points you brought up. But I want to call out there's a metaphor that I've used over the years. Like if you have a fuzzy picture in front of you, it's like it's pixelated. You don't have good resolution. And what you're doing is bringing a lot of pixels to the picture, to the image. So you can actually clearly see what's there and how to take appropriate action. So the dimensionality. So some might listen to you go, oh, overwhelmed and what I do. But with that clarity, we can point and take targeted action. So I would imagine that you would concur on that. But my pointed question is this: given the complexity embedded within that, who is the audience to tackle all that? And I'm going to make it a leading question shamelessly, because formerly
Mhm.
a lot of this resided within HR. However, given digital transformation that's happening, it's IT, it's operations, those who are guiding remote work now. Sometimes it's legal when we talk about cybersecurity and data management. I mean, what do you see? Who's the audience to tackle all this? Is it multifunction? Is HR going to lead? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
There are several models because we studied this landscape, and employee experience is starting to take shape inside the organizations, and HR is starting to embrace it. Of course, right now we're at the early stage of the journey, but people are recognizing the importance of bringing different functions that have a part of the responsibility. And HR is really well positioned to take that intermediary role. In some cases, the organization could possibly just change altogether what HR structure looks like to adapt to this employee experience. In some cases, they create a separate team that then brings the right resources to make the right type of changes.
Hmm.
The ideal scenario, of course, is to create it in HR and have the accountability concentrated, at least for the beginning, in one place, and then over time, as you train people on what a good experience looks like, how can you create that for workers, then you can spread it across the business units or across the other departments and functions. But one thing that I was talking to one of my friends about, and it just struck me, is like, how can an employee know what a good experience could be for customers if they're not experiencing it internally? So I think from that
Yeah,
point of view, it's a business imperative to start investing in that experience and creating that best workplace for people in a way that will then encourage them and enable them to be their best when they deliver those to their customers.
absolutely love it. Well, Stella, thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing. How can people learn more about you and Reframe work?
They can come to the website, reframe.work. We publish occasionally blogs, and we even had Lexi this week as a guest blog on the topic of diversity and inclusion. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how you're dealing with workplace experience in your organizations and what type of changes you're seeing happening in this space. I'm always curious about new technologies. So if you're trying to solve some problems in the workplace through technology, connect with me. I'd love to learn more about it. You're doing too. And I am at Stella at reframe.work. So reach out.
There you go. All right, Stella. Again, thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for being your awesome self. You stay safe, and look forward to hopefully seeing you before too long. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Al, for what you're doing and bringing and amplifying the voices.